I'm Erica Lukes, host of UFO Classified. For me, life isn't simply black and white. Life is full of many unknowns. It is my goal to travel the world and to work with the world's leading experts in the hopes of making groundbreaking discoveries. Join me on UFO Classified Friday nights at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, only on KCOR.
UFO Classified.
No more plausible deniability. Fact, fiction, or the truth. You decide. And now, the new voice of the high desert, the hostess of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes.
What is the world of ufology without a good controversy? And of course, over the decades, there have been a handful of controversial cases. Rendlesham Forest is a prime example, and even before Nick Redfern's groundbreaking book came out a few days ago, there were controversies. There were different factions of people. It was very tainted with a lot of different things, a lot of nastiness. And then you've got a place like Skinwalker Ranch over here in the U.S. where you've got the same types of things, factions, belief systems, stories, narratives, all of these things that have taken hold. And when you challenge people's belief systems with regard to this, it can be really ugly. I am not quite sure why we have a need to believe so desperately and not look at facts, especially when you have questions about weapons testing taking place in different locations. That, to me, should maybe tell each and every one of us that we had to get over our belief systems for a second and realize that people are potentially being put in harm's way, and we have an obligation to do something instead of hang on to our UFO beliefs. But that is my opinion. You know that I'm pretty forthright with that, especially the more I look into the CIA, to covert projects, to different players who move funding here and there and dangle carrots in one direction when we should be looking in another. And my friends, I know that all of you who are here and are in chat and are listening all over the world, you understand that we're not getting told the whole story, and you understand there is something critically important going on, and we need to do our homework. A book came out, The Rendlesham Forest UFO Conspiracy, A Close Encounter Exposed as a Top Secret Government Experiment. And yes, needless to say, that has been quite the topic. I myself was very excited at the release of this book. I know that Nick Redfern does methodical research, and in fact, I'm always amazed at how much knowledge he has. But it was a great insight into something, like I said, that we need to be very aware of right now. We have a great opportunity to learn, and I would just say get over your belief systems and look at facts. Nick Redfern is an author. He appears on many different TV shows. He lectures internationally and has written more books than anybody, I think, on the planet. Did you make it to the Guinness Book of World Records, like here now?
Not yet, not quite. I think Brad Steiger, actually, before he passed away, Brad wrote something like 194 or something like that.
Well, you're still young. I have faith.
Well, I might need like sort of some kind of immortality pill if I'm going to reach 200, but...
Well, I hear they're working on that, so don't worry.
Well, they probably are, you're right.
We could just reanimate you. That'd be good. But Nick, okay, so this has been quite an interesting week for you. We've talked a few times, and you had this book come out, and basically you have challenged a lot of people's belief systems with regard to one of the most controversial UFO cases in the history of the subject. How's that going for you?
Well, you're right. That's exactly what I've done. But I don't do it just to stir the pot, as some people think. You know, I do it because if I see a case that's an interesting case, and I look into it and I see sort of, red flags which have been ignored for so many years because people don't want to upset a cool story. Well, I think, we should address these red flags, and that's what I've done over the sort of last couple of years or so in relation to the Rendlesham Forest case in the UK. And for people who don't know what the case is or the full story, basically happened in the final days of December 1980. And the scenario is that strange lights were seen just outside the twin bases of Royal Air Force Bentwaters and Royal Air Force Woodbridge, which are essentially they were built in the 1940s as British military bases, but when the Cold War progressed in the 50s and 60s, a contingent of US personnel were brought over to help, in the event that the Russians might, launch a nuclear strike or whatever. So you have these two twin bases, and they basically are just in the direct area of Rendlesham Forest, which is this large area of forest which itself goes back a long, long time. And the story is that a number of the military personnel, the U.S. personnel stationed at the base, saw these strange lights. They got permission to go out there, and that's when things kind of went really weird, with people seeing strange lights in the sky, reports of a bizarre-looking craft coming down from the skies, missing time, and reports of communications with aliens, and a really strange, almost sort of mind-warping situation deep in the woods. And it's become known as the UK's Roswell, not because anything actually crashed, but because in terms of its visibility and the fact that, so many people, military personnel, were out in the woods seeing these strange sort of lights and strange phenomena in the sky. And so it was, an important case because the sighting or the location was two strategic military bases, which would have been sort of primary, in the event of a Cold War becoming a hot war. So that's the story, really, in a nutshell. Now, over the years, people may not realize this, but I'm not the first one to sort of talk about different theories and ideas for what happened at Roswell, at Rendlesham, apart from me. For example, on one of the nights of the events, there was actually a spiraling of a Russian space satellite coming down from the skies, and some people have suggested it could have been that. You have theories that there was like an early stealth plane came down, or maybe something like an early drone, things like this. So in other words, within the field of ufology, there have been a few questions asked about the nature of the event and what it really involved. But nobody certainly has written a full-length book demonstrating a sort of, in many ways, which is what is a far more controversial scenario than the idea that aliens came down. So, and the more I looked into it, the more I came to see evidence that suggested to me that this was more along the lines of sort of a psychological warfare operation using hallucinogens, holograms, and even the control of a manipulation of ball lightning in the sky to create even more of like a theatrical kind of situation. And of course, within the field of ufology, most people in that field are happy and content to, to go with the UFO angle. And I think one of the primary reasons is because it's a cool story, which it is, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's correct, or right. So that's why I stepped into it to put things straight.
Well, and God bless you. I think that's a good thing. And I've been watching some of the the banter going back and forth about this, or even Skinwalker Ranch and some different things. And I'm amazed that people, it's like common sense just goes out the door. And I don't understand that. I mean, I remember being in high school and reading Communion and different things. And my beliefs back then, my thoughts are definitely not what they are right now, because I've just learned too much. And, I'm not so stubborn that I'm going to hold on to my belief systems and watch something like this that is taking place that is incredibly serious. I'm not going to sit there and go, oh, it's an alien. I mean, it's like, I don't understand the thinking, the thought process of people who are not able to look at reality.
Well, I think the primary reason is because it is, like I said, it is a cool story, and it's filled with conspiracy and tales of aliens. But the more you look into it, as I said, I started to see not so much holes in the story, but very suspicious aspects that suggested or pushed it down the angle of what I call like a secret experiment, for want of an easier term, so to speak. And when I started to look into this, I mean, I should stress, when this happened, December 1980, I mean, I was still a kid, I wasn't sort of like some sort of precocious kid running around, demanding the truth of what happened in Rendlesham. I didn't get into this until sort of 10 years later, something like that. And by that time, Jenny Randalls, Dot Street, and Brenda Butler had written a really good book called Sky Crash, which came out in 1984. And that was the first book written about Rendlesham. And, it was a cool book, and it did focus, to a great degree on the theory that aliens came down. But to their credit, they also looked at some of these alternative theories. But by the time I was sort of like, I guess, 25, I was still in that I want to believe mode, and I fully agree, I admit that, that it was a great story, and I wanted it to be true. And a part of me, if it was proved to be extraterrestrial now, well, that would still be amazing. And I'd have to say, like Peter did, I've got to change my approach, to the case. But I don't think that is the case. But, belief systems and, sort of closely held scenarios are extremely difficult to sort of prise away from people who are absolutely sure that this or that happened. But the scenario itself is a fascinating one, but there are a lot of aspects to the story that a lot of people won't know about, and when you're ready, I can tell you, what some of those issues are which may actually open a lot of people's eyes, really.
Well, you know what? I'm ready, so bring it on.
All right. Well, the most important thing to start with is the location. And by the location, I don't actually mean directly Rendlesham Forest. I'm talking about within about 3 to 4 miles all around Rendlesham Forest. What a lot of people may not know is that the whole area around Rendlesham Forest, going back to 1935, has been a hotbed of activity, top secret activity of the British government. For example, in 1935, the British government created this committee called the Tizard Committee, and what it basically was a top secret early program to develop radar, because this was when Hitler was sort of flexing his muscles, and it was almost inevitable there was going to be a Second World War. And so the Tizard Committee was designed to create the most advanced radar that was around at that time, which wasn't that particularly great, but it was around. And so we've got the Tizard Committee in 1935. Now, in the early years of the 1940s, when the Second World War was going ahead, there's a little town just outside of Rendlesham Forest called Shingle Street. It's a little tiny classic little English village, and it borders the east coast of England, so where it reaches the North Sea. And there have been rumours for years that some sort of weird technology was used to essentially kill a contingent of German troops who secretly tried to invade from the east coast of England. And the rumours are that this technology set all the German soldiers on fire, and the water, the North Sea part of it, was caught on fire, and all the men were killed, just burned to death. And one of the theories is that some sort of bizarre advanced device was used at Shingle Street. And on top of that, in the 1950s, there was more top secret radar experimentation undertaken. And then in the 1960s, you had Cobra Mist, which was another, what was called over-the-horizon radar. Now, so in other words, between 1935 with the Tizard Committee right up to the 1990s, with all these weird experiments and conspiracies all surrounding the area, this goes on for like 60 years. Now, to put it in perspective for you, the Tizard Committee, the Cobra Mist radar experiments, Shingle Street, and this weird situation with all these burned German soldiers, and Marconi, the corporation, were also working there. All of those incidents, all of those facilities are less than 10 miles from Rendlesham Forest. So, in other words, you've got this forest surrounded by advanced technologies and classified programs going back almost, well, I would say a century, but at least around about 80, 85 years. A lot of people don't know that. They don't realize that, they think it's just like an isolated forest, in just the plains of England or whatever. But it isn't. The whole area for decades has been, as I said, a hotbed for secret projects. And when you put that in the, in the picture of Rendlesham, my view is, well, if all those experiments have been going on for 80 years, which they have, why shouldn't this one just be yet another government experiment undertaken in the exact same location?
Right. And what, I mean, it's funny because I know that you've mentioned the use of hallucinogens and holograms and different things. And it's been, again, funny to watch some of the reactions of people and, no, this wasn't the case. And you just think, have you looked at history? Have you looked at, there are people that are pointing to Dugway Proving Ground and how they were dosing soldiers back in the day. You look at, what happened in 1951 in France and at Pont Saint-Esprit, where you have people that were, the whole town developed very strange maladies, hallucinations, all of these things. And it was later thought that the CIA was involved in this. And so, I mean, why do people have such a hard time looking at the history and things? And even, with UFO sightings in the United States, it's like we look at specific places where there are a series of sightings, and then you look at the fact that certain contractors for the government have stepped in and tried to delude people, discourage people, get their information. Why is that? I have a feeling it has nothing to do with UFOs. I hate to say it, but just a thought.
Well, yeah, I mean, when you sort of like the why and whatever on this, I mean, a lot of it just comes down to sort of human nature, of people like a cool, interesting story. And I do as well. But, you just don't see too many people talking about all these secret experiments going back to the 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s, almost in sort of, spitting distance from Rendlesham Forest. And I don't really understand why so many people have either ignored or I just simply haven't understood the gravity of well, Rendlesham Forest is not just this regular forest. So much weirdness has gone on. I just don't understand why people avoid talking about that.
I don't know, but I will say, the more time I spend in this, and the more things I see, and I step back and really pay attention to. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that people are put in this community to distract and to, give a red herring over there and, dangle the carrot, like I was saying in the opening. It's like, just here, let's look over here, and then we're going to get away with this over here. And, I think the UFO narrative has been so craftily used for decade after decade by the intelligence community when something else is taking place. How great is it? What's a UFO? Hey, people are, experiencing, people are having all of these health effects, but, don't ask, it was a UFO. It's like, give me a break.
Well, you're right. And I mean, when you mention, all these issues about, presenting something as a UFO that actually wasn't, that's basically the theme in the book. It's not a case of just running these experiments for a bit of fun. The sort of approach that I've taken based on the data given to me is that what basically went on in Rendlesham Forest was the testing of 3 different things which were very carefully used at the same place and the same location. One was the deployment of low-grade hallucinogens, which would affect, to a certain degree, the mindset of the people in the woods. The other one is the use of the controlled use of what is known as ball lightning. Now, ball lightning is a very rare phenomenon, sort of like a globe-type phenomenon in the sky. And through the Freedom of Information Act, I got hold of a 92-page file from the 1960s and from the early 60s through the late 60s as to how the military was learning ways to essentially weaponize ball lightning. In other words, you could direct lightning onto like a military facility or direct it at a tank or something, or a plane in the sky. So, it could be a very dangerous weapon. But what's intriguing is that a lot of the phenomena that was reported over the forest very much sounds like ball lightning. And I actually found a lot of data within that 92-page document that absolutely mirrors what was going on in Rendlesham Forest. And on top of that, so you've got the hallucinogens, you've got the ball lightning, and the other one was this issue of highly sophisticated holograms. So, the plan was to lure the military personnel into the woods and then have the high-up people, in essence, kind of watching to see what's going on.
And then I've got to stop you right there, because this is really, really important. All of it is, and we're going to get into that when we get back from the break. I want to thank Nick Redfern for being here. He just has written The Rendlesham Forest UFO Conspiracy. You can get that on Amazon. Make sure you get it. This is going to be one that is an important read for all of us. We will be right back.
Stand by.
This is UFO Classified with Erica Lukes.
Erica Lukes.
The phone lines are open now at 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio. More UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
With Erica Lukes on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. After this.
Hello, KCOR listeners. Lorian Fenton here from the Fenton Files to tell you how to watch UFOCon 2020, which was held right before the virus scare in Shelter-in-Place. It was a conference like no other, so don't miss out on the specially priced on-demand replay of what is already the most talked about conference of 2020. Visit UFOCon2020.com. That's UFOCon2020.com.
Now, broadcasting in digital HD radio.
1 million miles till midnight. A story of timelines, artificial worlds, simulated races, and the galactic imprint, and the destiny of a blue world called Earth. 1 Million Miles Till Midnight, written by Solaris Blue Raven, is a journey through the mind's eye which allows the reader to surf a wave of technological and multidimensional intellect, revealing a bridge between conscious design and the truth. A multidimensional bleed-through awakens the world of artificial intelligence to set sail into the frontiers of a vast multiverse, morphing planets and terraforming ascended worlds beyond the linear programs of a fated race. 1 Million Miles Till Midnight will awaken, inspire, prepare, and enlighten one to the many multidimensional states of consciousness and worlds we reside in. With every cell and atom, we are this truth and multiverse. 1 Million Miles Till Midnight, written by Solaris Blue Raven. Available now at Amazon.com. Don't wait. Get your copy today.
We interrupt to bring you this.
Would you like to advertise on KCOR Digital Radio Network?
This is what I'm talking about!
At a fraction of the cost of traditional radio advertising, why not?
Tell them the good news.
Whether you need to promote your next book, product, or service, we can customize a package for just about any budget.
Finally, there is hope for the hopeless.
Why limit yourself to a tiny local market when KCOR can brand you to the world?
Here's all you do.
Visit KCORradio.com or contact our sales department by email at saleskcorradio.com.
We want it now!
See the difference with us by letting us work for you.
This ain't reality TV!
The KCOR Digital Radio Network.
Are you ready to go?
It's showtime!
Here we go, world.
You're listening to the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
Broadcasting from the heart of Las Vegas, Nevada.
Their base is so large it has to draw most of its power from the nearby nuclear fusion plant.
The future of radio is here and now.
You're listening to
UFO Classified with Erica Lukes, where the truth isn't hidden beneath the black lines of a Sharpie.
That's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
To be on with Erica, call 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio.
Radio contact.
Share your thoughts on the show on Twitter by using hashtag KCOR. Or head over to the live chats at KCORradio.com.
The audience goes nuts!
And now, your host of UFO Classified.
Are you ready?
Erica Lukes.
Erica Lukes.
Welcome back to UFO Classified. I want to just give a shout out to all the people that donate to support the show and keep it on the air. Thank you very, very much for your kind contributions. I believe very wholeheartedly that this show is important for all of us because there's not a lot of truth out there when it comes to all of this, and we deserve the truth. That's what we've been striving for, supposedly, in the field of ufology. I don't know, but maybe we could question that as we look back. But, we're supposed to be looking at this for truth, whatever that means. And it can be very ugly, especially when you look at things like the potentials for using non-lethal weapons in places and then using the UFO narrative to cover things up and to distract the public. The implications for that are pretty jaw-dropping. And of course, there is a vested interest in people to try to stop that narrative. I wonder why. But I am here tonight with my friend Nick Redfern, who has authored many, many books. A book that I talk about all the time is Final Events, and that is a book that is just, again, another must-read, but you can look for his books on Amazon. I recommend reading all of them. I've never met a researcher that has so much information just on the tip of his tongue and it's incredible. He's got a new book out called The Rendlesham Forest UFO Conspiracy, A Close Encounter Exposed as a Top Secret Government Experiment. And yes, it is creating quite a bit of stir in the community, and praise the Lord for that, because we need to open our eyes. What I want to just say, Nick, we've been talking about, you mentioned the different things that were utilized there in Rendlesham, and I want to say Bruce Cornett has a question here, and he wants me to ask if you're saying that the Rendlesham sightings are all secret human industrial technology, and then he says, is that not just as bad as calling them ETs? Unidentified means unidentified. So what is your take on that?
He's asking if I think it's all an experiment, Rendlesham.
Well, he's just saying you're saying that. I mean, he's saying that if you're saying that this is human industrial technology, definitively, isn't that just as bad as calling them ETs?
Oh, I see. Well, yeah. I mean, I think there's no doubt that. I mean, if that is the scenario, and I believe it is, that would be. A sensational, controversial, and for many people, perceived as a dangerous situation when you're sort of, manipulating the mindsets of people without their knowledge, and you're luring them into a scenario which isn't real, but which seems 100% real, So, yes, I mean, I think anything where military personnel, aren't made aware of what's going on. I mean, that can be a very dangerous situation. I talk about in the book something very similar that happened in 1964 in the UK, where British military personnel were dosed with LSD, interestingly enough, in an area of woods. And they... within 15, 20 minutes, they were all having hallucinations and feeling weird. And this was all filmed by the government. And the film is now declassified. You can find it on YouTube. If you Google LSD 1964 British Army, you'll see the footage that the military took. And, some of the guys just cannot function. One of them looks like he's about to have like a serious panic attack. He looks his face looks haunted. And you see a quick shot of him with a nurse who's hanging onto his wrist. He's got this horrible look of concern on his face. And so my view is that anything like this, where you've got military personnel put into a situation of, very alternative to what they're used to, and putting them in that place, I mean, that's not something to do. That's dangerous, and it's unpredictable as well, as to what the response might be. If you see something, a highly sophisticated holographic thing coming towards you, I mean, it's lucky that, nobody got hurt, really.
Well, and it is interesting because the more I research into all of this and some of the CIA operations and things that bled into the 70s that are probably still going on as far as the mind control, MK Ultra type of stuff, I mean, it's like you see that this has happened time and time again without consent, and this is something, I mean, I know that there are people that were high up involved in some of these projects, and they felt that they were doing a great service for humanity because they were developing non-lethal weapons that could be used without, causing a person to die. But at what end? I mean, and so for people to say, in fact, Travis Taylor, who's on the new Skinwalker Ranch show, I think he was asked by somebody to comment on the non-lethal weapons possibility at Skinwalker Ranch, and he said that they hadn't done that since the 60s. And, I would certainly think that somebody with his qualifications and his background would certainly understand that that is not an accurate statement, but, that's one of those things, I suppose.
Well, you're right, but when people say, well, this program or that was cancelled, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, there's so many times, something surfaces to show that something actually is still going on, and so, it's kind of never say never. There's always, well, not always, but very often you find, when there's somebody's testifying, before a committee, no, we gave that up, 20 years ago, sir, and then it turns out, it was still going on, that kind of thing. You find numerous examples of like that, and but yeah, I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, as well as being controversial, there are the potential physical and psychological effects that this event has happened. I mean, the one thing I can say, I think what everybody, whether you're an author or researcher, Rendlesham, I think what everybody in the Rendlesham research field can agree on, the one thing more than anything else, is that all the guys who were involved in varying ways had their lives changed. And, everybody agrees on that. And I think that was part of the whole process, was to see the extent to which the human mind could be manipulated and altered, but also to see the profound effects that presenting or projecting something that seems otherworldly, just to carefully chronicle how the guys responded to that, and to realize also that 40 years later, it's still at the forefront of their mind. You can, if you're sort of a doctor, working psychology, that kind of thing, and you're brought in, they could learn a tremendous amount from just addressing and looking at what's gone on in relation to this case for the last 40 years, and realize, well, if we can make the guys think they're seeing aliens and UFOs, we can do something like this on the battlefield, and to the extent where, you could screw with the minds of the enemy and plunge them into, an unforeseen scenario. And I think that was what it was all about, was trying to find new ways to essentially play with the minds of the enemy. But how do you do that? Well, you work it first in a domestic scenario, in friendly country. So I think that's essentially what it all came down to.
Absolutely, and it is interesting because some people could say that you're just as much as we've got the ET angle, now here you are presenting this new narrative, and so are you a secret agent? Are you perhaps stirring the agenda?
Well, actually, no, I'm not. But I have to say, I mean, whenever I put out a controversial book like this, there's always about 4 or 5 people in the comments, whether it's, at my blog or at Facebook, particularly at Facebook, people say, well, maybe Nick's been told to do this, he's been hired by this agency or whatever. And I always tell people the truth, that if you want to get rich, do not enter the field of ufology. I mean, I don't sort of in that many radio shows, talk about, sort of my private life and whatever. But I mean, what I can tell you, I live in about a 400 square foot apartment. I drive a 16-year-old Ford Taurus, and I'm careful where I eat, because of costs. I mean,
yeah, but that's a good cover for a spy, Nick. I mean, seriously.
Well, I mean,
come on now.
Well,
are you supposed to be driving around in a Rolls Royce if you're a spy?
Well, yeah, but I really do drive around. Well, you've seen it. I mean, I really do drive around in a 16-year-old Ford Taurus. I could understand people would be suspicious if, I've got a big mansion and a Ferrari or whatever. But, I mean, joking aside, I can tell you for sure that the books that sell massively in ufology are the books that are telling the reader, or the UFO research community, is telling them what they want to hear. Books that tell people what they want to hear in ufology sell extremely well. Books that present a scenario that most people in ufology don't like or don't agree with, those books don't sell well. So, in other words, it doesn't help my position to write a book that destroys one of the most famous cases. But I could, if nothing else, I have to tell the story as it came to me, and to present it as something else, just to sell copies is not what I do. I wrote the book because I felt the evidence was going down that pathway of a secret experiment. So, but yeah, I mean, if I was working for the government, I'm sure that my situation and homes and cars, would be very different.
But that I'm sure people throw that around there, and I mean, I've heard things about myself as well, and so it's always interesting. But let's get back to you talking about the different types of things that they were utilizing, and with regard to the low-grade hallucinogens, where did you get the information that is what they were using?
Okay. Well, again, Rendlesham Forest, the experiment, it has, as I said, it's got sort of multiple different aspects to the experimentation that went on. Now, one of them was, as I mentioned briefly, the sort of the release, if you like, of low-grade hallucinogens. Now, we're not talking about LSD-based aerosols, but we are talking about hallucinogens which can have a very quick effect on people. Now, this particular story of the hallucinogens being released into Rendlesham Forest actually goes back to the early 1980s. Now, because it was a UK-based case, even though the guys involved were American, because it was in the UK, for the most part, the research was done by UK researchers like Jenny Randalls, Dot Street, Brenda Butler, who I mentioned earlier. But if you look at the Porton Down story of the whole scenario, we see something very different. Now, Porton Down is a top-secret facility in the southwest of England where they do a lot of research into sort of chemical and biological warfare. And back in the 50s is when they started doing research into hallucinogens and LSD at Porton Down. Now, that's in essence, the way in which Porton Down worked, looking at hallucinogens, viruses, things like this. But in relation to the way in which it came into the Rendlesham story, well, our mutual friend Ray Beauchet heard, just very briefly, he heard snippets of a story in the early 1980s, around 1983, that there was a connection between Rendlesham Forest and Porton Down. Now, the late Georgina Bruni, who was a journalist and a good friend of mine, she wrote a book in 2000 called You Can't Tell the People, which was her investigative study of Rendlesham. And she was the one person more than anybody else who really got to grips with the Porton Down story. And Georgina was, as I said, an investigative journalist, and she uncovered a number of sources, several of them in the Royal Air Force Police and a couple more in an organisation in the UK called Special Branch, which is like the intelligence division of the British police force. And she learned of several, not just one, but several similar experiments going on in Suffolk, England, on the night of the Rendlesham Forest event. And there were reportedly at least two more experiments on that same night, not too far away, which involved the potential release, as I said, of hallucinogens to really mess with the guy's mind. It's one thing to see these sort of, lights in the sky and holograms, but then to find your mind, isn't functioning properly. Now, one of the most important people who delved into the story of Porton Down was Lord Hill Norton. Now, Lord Hill Norton in the 1970s, early 1970s, he was one of the most powerful and influential people in the British military in the 1970s. And he developed a deep interest in the whole Rendlesham Forest story. One of the things that he was told about and which he tried to get to the bottom of was the connection between Rendlesham Forest and Porton Down and these low-grade hallucinogens. And he pushed and pushed within the House of Lords, and he basically got sorry, we can't find anything about this. And what's interesting is the government didn't say, this is nonsense, there's nothing to this. What they actually told Lord Hill Norton, because he was by this time, he was retired, so he was out of the loop. But, as I said, they didn't deny that everything that he'd found about Porton Down and Rendlesham was true or not. They basically said, well, we went looking, but we can't find any files. Now, saying you cannot find the files is not the same as saying there are no files and it's garbage. Government agents are very good at wording things in a way in which allows them sort of a get-out clause. The way it worked, they said, we went looking and we cannot find anything in the archives of Porton Down. Well, maybe they weren't in the archives specifically. Maybe it was an ongoing program. But when you've got somebody like Lord Hill Norton, who was one of the most powerful, influential figures in the UK military in the 70s, and even he can't get the answers when, 15 years later he's retired, that just shows you the extent of how deep this goes. But, Georgina was a very well-respected journalist. Hill Norton, sort of one of the most primary, military figures in the UK, and all coming up with threads and leads that bring Porton Down to Rendlesham Forest. And one of the whispers that came around was that the night of the first event, which was December the 26th, there are rumours that scientists from Porton Down actually came down on December the 25th to position in the woods, carefully position these devices which would deploy the hallucinogenic substances. Now, what's intriguing about this is that the day before it all started was Christmas Day. Now, in the UK, everybody, it's like a tradition, everybody's at home, cooking Christmas dinner, etc., etc. So what's the best way to avoid anybody seeing anything weird going on in Rendlesham Forest? Well, let's start it all off on Christmas Day when everybody's going to be at home. I find that kind of intriguing, the date of when the hallucinogens were supposedly placed, ready and primed to go the next day. That's the best day of the year is to do it on Christmas Day, and probably Christmas Day night when everyone's still at home, watching TV and eating turkey, etc., etc., which is what we do in the UK. It's like a tradition. And but not only that, there's also another intriguing aspect. Because this was Christmas, the staff at both bases, Woodbridge and Bentwaters, they were on a skeleton kind of staff because so many people had asked for time off for Christmas with their families, because a lot of the American people who were based at Woodbridge and Bentwaters, they were there for 4 or 5 years, so they'd rented out houses in the area. It wasn't like they all lived on the base, they lived in the little villages. So, in other words, you've got the situation where the skeleton crew was all that was in place on the base on the nights when these experiments happened. So again, you've got an intriguing scenario. Have as few people on the base as possible would ensure that even fewer would know about it,
Very interesting, and we're getting ready to go to break in a couple of minutes, and I just wanted to ask you a question from Jeff, and he wants to know if you believe that the United States Air Force Security Police and Deputy Base Commander were not aware of British secret military projects being tested in the area that could account for the UFO sighting.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's one of the most controversial aspects that, high-ranking personnel may have been duped and not even know about it. That sounds, the idea that that they would do that and actually not just affect the mindset of the lower graded people in the military, but also the high-ranking ones as well. Most people would think, well, surely they wouldn't do that. But, I mean, who knows? I mean, when you're talking about something like a top-secret experiment and you're looking at it from the perspective to get the best response, to determine how the project worked and so on, I cannot rule it out, that even some of the higher-level people may have become victims of this, as well as the people who perhaps just enlisted 18 months before.
Interesting. Okay, thank you for answering that question from Jeff. And I know that we've got so much to cover with regard to your book and some of the new things that you're putting forward for people, and I definitely recommend getting this book, The Rendlesham Forest UFO Conspiracy, A Close Encounter Exposed as a Top Secret Government Experiment. I think this is very important to read. I think it is important to ask questions. It is important to look at the players that have been steering the same narrative time and time again. And as I mentioned on multiple shows, look at what they did for a living. Look if they were involved in non-lethal weapons testing, or look at Hal Puthoff, look at John Alexander, look at some of the people that have been involved all of these years, look at their backgrounds, and then let's talk about what the implications are here, and if this is really ET or this is just a cover story and a great place to test on military soldiers or unsuspecting people. I'm Erica Lukes. We're going to take our longer of the breaks, and we will be back.
Listen very carefully.
This is Houston. Say again, please.
Houston, we've had a problem.
This is UFO Classified, live every Friday night, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. The truth is out there, just waiting to be discovered.
And now, if you will, accompany me on a journey to the future.
For more information on the host of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes, upcoming guests, as well as links to the past shows,
visit her website at UFOclassified.com.
UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
This is KCOR Las Vegas, home of the Digital Radio Network, broadcasting from a shack just south of Area 51.
Wait, that doesn't exist.
This is the KCOR Digital Radio Network. Now for the news.
The disc landed at a ranch at Corona, New Mexico, and the rancher turned it over to the Air Force. Rancher W.W. Brizzell was the man who discovered the saucer.
What I thought was a star began coming in my direction at a very rapid rate of speed.
The unidentified object, which some sources thought might be a blimp, moved slowly down the Pacific coast from Santa Monica and disappeared south of Long Beach.
I saw a UFO, and it went down the river, turned right at the United Nations, turned left, and then down the river.
UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
No more plausible deniability. Fact, fiction, or the truth. You decide. And now, the new voice of the high desert, the hostess of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes.
Welcome back to the second half of UFO Classified. I want to tell all my friends in chat, thank you for being here. Some of you I've had on the show before, so I want to give my mention to Tom Conwell, who's been on my show a couple times. He's authored a couple great books, which I will give links to, and actually more than a couple, and we're going to have him back. I love all of his work, and I'm glad that he is healthy and happy. And, of course, Phil, my favorite troublemaker, and I will say that the show that I did with Phil and Chris a 4 weeks ago received a lot of views. It's gained a lot of traction because we push the boundaries on multiple fronts. Bruce Cornett is there, and I want to say hello to Kevin, who is new in chat. Every week my audience is growing, and I'm getting more messages from all over the world, and people are understanding that there needs to be another story that is told here, and people are starting to understand that the UFO myth that has been spun out before us, thanks to the stars and some of these organizations, factions that are promoting stuff. They're actually not really they're promoting delusional thinking just to perhaps make money for private contractors, to steer the narrative. There are all sorts of things that could be taking place there. But if that's the type of disclosure that you think you want, I would say probably don't listen to my show. But I don't know. Just a thought there. I'm here with my friend and colleague, Nick Redfern, who has authored many, many books. You can find them on Amazon.com. We've talked about several of them. He loves Men in Black, Women in Black. He's written books on the topic, the Bigfoot book, many great books. But his latest book is something that is really sending shockwaves through the community. Rendlesham has always been a hot button case, and it's been one of those things that I've always just sat back because I did not want to get involved. There's too much going on there, and people have dug their feet into the ground, and they have ideas, and now this idea that has been floated around in the community for a while is out in full force thanks to the Rendlesham Forest UFO conspiracy, and now things are being put forward that should give all of us pause, and maybe we should step back and say, is what we have been told forever a UFO, or is that just a way to hide covert operation? I don't know, but Nick, tell us more, because this to me is so critical. And when you've talked about the different types of things that they were using, and then you mentioned Christmas, and how it was very curious that most of the people were off the base, they were at home with their families, so this would have been an ideal time. So give us some more thought about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's another very interesting aspect to all of this, which relates also to the hallucinogens, which were reportedly sort of expanded out into the woods. Now, one of the concerns that I learned, not my concerns, but one of the concerns that the people working on the experiment had was that, the idea was to deploy these hallucinogens and time it, with the holograms. And one of the concerns was, well, what if the weather changed and the wind blew and the hallucinogens went the wrong way? You could potentially have like a local village affected by the hallucinogens, never mind just the soldiers. Now, what's really interesting is that one of the things that Lord Hill Norton, was very interested in, and again sort of approached the government to try and get the answers to, revolved around a place called Hollesley Bay. And Hollesley Bay is actually a prison for young offenders. And there were rumours in the early years that Hollesley Bay was due to be evacuated on the night of the experiments. And the fact is that Hollesley Bay is only about 6 miles from Rendlesham Forest. It's no distance. That's, again, it sort of demonstrates another place, related to the story surrounding Rendlesham Forest. And so the concern was, if the hallucinogens went the wrong way, the weather changed, the wind changed, that's the most important thing. And if it the hallucinogens headed towards Hollesley Bay prison, then that might explain why, on the very same night, plans were put into place by an arm of the government called the Home Office. They were ready and primed to evacuate all of those young offenders, kids, well, not kids, but sort of 16, 17, 18, and evacuate them. And, there was this whispered story has been going around a long time that a couple of prisons in the area were going to be evacuated if necessary. And obviously, they weren't evacuated. We would know all about that. But again, it demonstrates a plausible reason why on the same night Hollesley Bay prison was due to be evacuated. And you wouldn't necessarily evacuate a prison just because somebody saw a UFO, but you definitely might do that if you're dealing with hallucinogens which are caught in the wind and going the wrong way.
Right, and I mean, you could say, because that it has been reported on the fact that, and there are documents to support this, but that prisons have been a great testing ground for different things, but that's in a controlled environment, and so you've got the fact that this is uncontrollable with if the winds were to change, and so that is really interesting. And where did you find this specific set of information?
Oh, well, this is interesting as well, because the the prison angle that actually surfaced first started to surface in 1986 from a guy named George Wilde. Now, George Wilde was a senior officer in the British prison service, and he heard about this story back in 1986 from other senior personnel in the prison service who essentially said, do you know what happened back in 1980? They were friends, colleagues, and despite, secrecy issues, they started talking about it, and George Wilde was given this story, and he then shared it with a guy named Graham Birdsall in 1988. And Graham Birdsall, he's dead now, unfortunately, but Graham built up the UFO magazine, as it was called, in the UK. And it continued until his death in, I think it was 2003. And so George Wilde, senior prison officer, shared the story as he got it from people in the Home Office, as it was called. The story was given to Graham. Graham shared it in a copy of his magazine in the late 80s, and this brought other people forward. And it also allowed Georgina Bruni, who wrote You Can't Tell the People, her own book on Rendlesham in 2000. And Georgina found more data about the potential evacuation, and so did Lord Hill Norton. And again, he petitioned the UK government to tell the truth of what happened with Hollesley Bay and these planned evacuations of prisons. And what's interesting is that in this case, the government actually admitted that in regard to one of the prisons, they could not find the prison governor's logbook for that period, even though logbooks were around for the previous and after situation. So, this in itself is intriguing, that the logbooks from that particular era cannot be found. And, I'm almost 100% sure that those logbooks contain something that basically said, in the event things go wrong, get the kids out of that prison.
Oh,
they were, when I say kids, that they were like sort of 17, 18. It was like what they call in the UK, like a young offenders facility.
Oh, interesting. Wow. How fascinating, the whole thing.
Can I tell you something even more weirder?
Yeah.
Or
yes,
weird?
please. Yes, please.
All right. Well, in Mississippi, there's a place called Horn Island. And Horn Island was used in the 1950s and the late 40s in the field of hallucinogens. And that was one of the concerns that the people running the programs had. The idea at Horn Island, we test these hallucinogens. Well, what happens if the wind blows and it heads towards local towns and villages, that kind of thing in the US? And that's one of the reasons why they decided to close it down. But what's really interesting is that Horn Island is only 3 miles from where the famous Pascagoula 1973 UFO encounter of Charles Hickson. And so, you've got this situation where another famous UFO event occurred where hallucinogens were being tested on the Mississippi River. So you've got Calvin Parker, Charles Hickson, the two guys, late at night fishing, saw this strange thing, taken on board a UFO, and it just so happens that where it occurred, the incident, was just 3 miles or thereabouts from Horn Island, where a huge amount of research was being undertaken into hallucinogens and concerns about the wind blowing. And so, that 1973, the incident in Mississippi, is almost identical in terms of the concerns as to what was going on in Rendlesham Forest in 1980.
And so have you ever heard anything from Parker questioning what happened, or has it always been an alien abduction?
Oh, yeah, actually, about 15, 16 months ago, I was able to spend a weekend with Calvin Parker, one of the two guys, because we were both speaking at the same conference, actually at the conference in Edinburgh, Texas, where me and you spoke at the year prior to that. And I had a really good time hanging out with Calvin, and there's no doubt in my mind, that he's telling the truth, as he saw it from his own perspective. But I mean, when you look at the parallels with Horn Island and, mind-altering, technologies being released on Horn Island, which is literally just, barely any distance from where the guys, Calvin Parker and Charles Hickson, had their experience, you have to wonder, was that, some sort of mind manipulation situation as well?
Well, and it makes you wonder, when something like that, if that was a mind manipulation, who were the people that first approached them? Were there people that were steering the narrative or pushing them down in a direction? And I think that with the Cash Landrum case, that appeared to be, from what I'm gathering as I'm looking into this, that appeared to be what John Schuessler and a couple other people that came in to the store, to the picture, to speak to them, and it's so. I mean, I think that would be a fascinating thing to really dig into. Who were the people that first contacted the people with the abduction experiences, and how did that roll out? And even with Rendlesham or Cash Landrum and some of these cases, you're seeing mentions of the same people. Kit Green, what was he doing? John Alexander. So there's some parallels here, and you have to wonder, what does that really have to do with the UFOs?
Well, I mean, one interesting thing to note is that, Rendlesham Forest was sort of 3 nights in the final days of December 1980, and Cash Landrum was in the last couple of days of December 1980. One was in the UK, one was in the US, and time-wise, they almost overlapped. I mean, that's not an exaggeration. And there are a number of researchers who do believe that the Cash Landrum case was not, a UFO event, but was the testing again of something, highly advanced. So now, whether or not there's a direct connection or not, I don't know. But what we can say for sure, that 2 of the most significant UFO events of the 1980s, Cash Landrum and Rendlesham Forest, pretty much overlapped each other, in terms of it being late, last final days of December 1980. So I think, somebody should really dig deeper into the connection between Rendlesham and Cash Landrum. That issue has been touched, but I think there's, a huge story there somewhere which may well, combine both cases together, even though, one's in the UK and one's in the US.
Right. And like I said, when you start digging into some of these things and you see the same people popping up and people being injured and the same people, showing up to run medical studies and do all of these things. And the one person, Dr. Kit Green, who we've all know and have talked about before, I mean, he shows up when people have been injured, and by his own account, they're not UFOs. This is man-made technology. So I don't know what you say about that one.
Well, yeah, I think anything that's, a really complicated, detailed scenario, I think it's always important to not just follow the data, but follow the agencies, the people, the people who run these kind of situations, people who are experts in the field of mind manipulation, and they may know someone working in a different program, like, for example, directed ball lightning, as I mentioned, in relation to, creating these UFOs, which actually weren't UFOs. So it's important, to sort of follow all of those threads. And I think one person who really kind of dug into that aspect was somebody we mentioned earlier briefly, a mutual friend, Ray Boucher. Now, Ray is someone who was one of the primary sources for my Final Events book, which came out in 2010. And it was a study of a small group within the government that believes that UFOs are not extraterrestrial, but they believe that the phenomenon is literally demonic. And so I wrote a book, this book, Final Events, that looked into this angle of how and why this group in the government came to conclude that the phenomenon was demonic. But in the process, Ray Boucher was approached by two Department of Defense physicists who shared a lot of information with him, and some of it related to Rendlesham. And Ray was told by these, what I would call sort of like an early time version of Edward Snowden, something along those lines. And they told him that, yes, something really weird did happen at Rendlesham, and the guys did think they'd seen a UFO or multiple UFOs, but that it was the whole thing was born out of holograms and sophisticated technology designed to fool people into thinking they're seeing UFO-type activity when they're actually not seeing anything of the type at all. Now, Ray was actually involved in the Rendlesham story as far back as the early 1980s. And in 1985, I should just stress that Ray was someone not that just sort of looked into Rendlesham, but he was someone who was very kind of proactive as well. For a while, he was in Nebraska, he ran the Mutual UFO Network, MUFON group that runs out of Nebraska. And he was the state director. So he was somebody who, really was heavily and deeply into the whole Rendlesham Forest issue. And he did something that most people in ufology have not done. He actually engaged his local senator, the senator for Nebraska, and essentially demanded answers as to what the truth of Rendlesham was. And so he approached his senator, which was Senator James Exon, and showed or mailed, bear in mind this was pre-internet eras, and so, he mailed a letter off to the senator and said, I would like your help to look into this case. And Senator Exon agreed to. And while I was doing the research for the book, Ray very generously gave me his entire collection of debate and conversations and letters, etc., sent between Senator Exon and Ray himself. And it was a very strange situation, because by Exon's own admission, that this was one of the biggest investigations he's actually done on behalf of a citizen of Nebraska. And the more that Exon got into the story, and you can tell this from his comments made to Ray in the correspondence they had, that Exon realized he was getting deep into something that he didn't recognize or realize that was going to, pull him in even further and further. And he actually made a really interesting statement, which kind of ties in with this experiment. And Exon wrote, and I actually reproduced this document in the book because it's an important one. And Senator Exon said to Ray Boucher that he'd uncovered further information on the incident, but none of it was related to a UFO event. And that kind of sounds like that the senator was trying to say, well, yes, something did happen, but it wasn't UFO connected. That kind of, to me, with hindsight, that kind of sounds like he was trying to say, well, yes, something strange happened. There was no UFO aspect. And to me, that sounds like he's saying, something like an experiment without actually coming straight out and saying that. But eventually, Senator Exon cut off the correspondence and said, we've gone as far as we can, and I cannot help you anymore.
Wow.
So, so that's sort of an incredible part of the story. You pursue this, with your senator, and you find yourself plunged almost into this very strange world where, for example, Ray, for example, one of the things that really stood out for him, he brought it up.
Of course, we've got to take a break right when you've got
all right.
Something to tell me, but to tell all of us. But I want to encourage all of you to get the Rendlesham Forest UFO Conspiracy. This is an important book. It's going to expand your horizons and definitely challenge your belief system. So definitely get that. It's available on Amazon. I am Erica Lukes. We are going to take a break, and we will be back.
Stand by.
This is UFO Classified with Erica Lukes.
Erica Lukes.
The phone lines are open now at 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio. More UFO Classified.
UFO Classified
with Erica Lukes on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. After this.
Do you want the story behind the story? Then tune in Tuesday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern for Paranormal Rewind.
Enter a world of the twisted and deformed.
The mics are hot as author Sam Baltrusis and paranormal tech guru Keith Bailey take you behind the scenes with Paranormal Rewind.
Paranormal Rewind.
A show that transports you back in time and re-examines featured TV shows, radio broadcasts, and books that made the paranormal what it is today.
Sound good?
This mind-bending as well as engaging one-hour show will feature some of the best para-celebrities, investigators, and authors from around the world.
It's okay. There's nothing wrong with that.
Come visit paranormal pop culture's most terrifying and memorable cases today. Paranormal Rewind, Tuesdays at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
Vegas, baby!
Vegas' #1 source for talk and new music.
How cool is that?
There is a world outside that which we live in, a realm where fact and fiction collide. The Paradigm Matrix.
The Paradigm Matrix.
Hosted by Willie Miranda, every Friday night at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern.
The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us, even now in this very room.
The 1-hour show that will surely leave you hanging on the edge of the rabbit hole.
The Paradigm Matrix
explores a universe of topics from UFOs, cryptozoology, conspiracies, as well as all things paranormal.
Enter a world of the twisted and deformed.
Friday night, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. The Paradigm Matrix, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network, where fact and fiction collide.
We interrupt this program.
Time to stand up and dance your ass off. The Grind, nightly and exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
Come on, it's kind of hot.
1, 2, 3, 4.
You are listening
to the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
I love the way it sounds.
I love the music. Oh, I listen to.
The future of radio is here and now.
You're listening to
UFO Classified with Erica Lukes, where the truth isn't hidden beneath the black lines of a Sharpie.
That's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
To be on with Erica, call 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio.
Radio contact.
Share your thoughts on the show on Twitter by using hashtag KCOR. Or head over to the live chats at KCORradio.com.
The audience goes nuts.
And now, your host of UFO Classified.
Are you ready?
Erica Lukes.
Erica Lukes.
Welcome back to UFO Classified. As always, I'm happy to spend my Friday evenings with my friends from all over the world. It gives me a lot of hope to know that there are people who are intelligent, who ask questions, who understand that the narrative that is being put forward is not a narrative that is necessarily something that we could be, that we should trust, because disclosure is not going to come about the way it is being rolled out by certain factions. That's just a pretty plain and simple thing there. So I'm glad that my listeners actually understand that and look at reality and raise important questions. I also want to thank all of you for supporting the show. Please make sure that you take, if you get the link for the show, please share it. And I appreciate also all of your positive comments if you go to my YouTube channel. Thanks to Northern UFOs, who's posting the shows on YouTube. Every once in a while you can find the lovely troll there that has lots of special things to say. So any positive support in YouTube and the social media arena, that would be fantastic. And clearly I'm trying to learn techniques from my friend Nick Redfern, because he's just like, yeah, whatever, bring it on. And now he's going through the same type of thing here with his latest book on Rendlesham Forest. You're seeing a lot of people who are they're rather agitated about this because it is challenging their belief systems, quote unquote. And Nick has done great research and is pointing out the fact that they were, in all likelihood, this was a test on military personnel. So, Nick, and you were mentioning Ray Boucher, and I think this is important because I spoke to Ray maybe 3 weeks ago. I like to talk with him every once in a while. He's an amazing man, and it was really curious. It always has been fascinating to me to see how he did do some great digging into Rendlesham, and he's one of those unsung heroes as far as Rendlesham, because there's been so much other, stuff on top of it. But he did a great deal of work, as you mentioned, communicating with Senator Exxon, and then having, like you mentioned, that when this is important, and this is in your book, basically Exxon saying that, you can't go any further, and that this it really had nothing to do with UFOs. So I find that incredibly, I would love to see all of those exchanges.
Well, yeah, that's a fascinating part of the story. It's not like a previously unknown one, but unless you're really into the Rendlesham Forest story, and all the ins and outs, it is one of the most important ones, this sort of extensive correspondence that the two had in relation to this, which began, with Ray Boucher contacting Exxon and say, can you look into this for me? And Exxon did so. But the further and further everybody got into it, it got really weird and strange, and almost sort of from the perspective of Senator Exxon, you can tell from his correspondence that he just did not want to keep talking about this. He wanted to sort of put it to bed, so to speak, which is interesting, and but equally intriguing, but in a very different way. Is I mentioned before the break that Ray was approached by two so-called whistleblowers who informed him, of the whole angle of this being like a ruse. It wasn't a close encounter as we expect the term to mean, but it was a close encounter, but in a very strange and alternative fashion.
And now tell us again, because you mentioned this earlier, what the two gentlemen did for a living. What was their role?
Oh, well, they worked in the Department of Defense, and they were physicists. And one of the things they told Ray was that one of the most important things was the name of the project. And as to why, what I'm going to say now, I don't know why, but Ray was told that if he or anyone else, one of his colleagues, found out the name of that particular project, they would have been in like a world of just a terrible situation. And I point that out in the book, that for some reason the title, the name, the code name of that project was so highly classified that he would be in a world of trouble. And I mentioned that, with those words. He would be in a world of trouble if he'd been able to find the name of the project. And I guess, if he was able to get the name, he could then have pursued things through the Freedom of Information Act. You cannot really send a letter to the Pentagon, say, please tell me about your sort of hologram program, because there's nothing of that name. You have to provide detailed information if you're going to file a Freedom of Information Act. It cannot be hazy, So I suspect that was the reason why those two guys warned him, about talking about the name of the project, should he one day get hold of the name.
And wow. And, it is, again, here you've got somebody digging into something, right? And then you've got people that can't be revealed. Their identities will always be secret, who kind of assimilate themselves into Ray's life. And did that lead him off track from really looking into Rendlesham? You see this in different circumstances where people are getting close to things, and then in steps a mystery man trying to divert attention.
Well, that often happens in ufology, whether it's to sort of push us down a different way, or sometimes, whistleblowers push us down another way, which is the right direction. But that's the big problem with working with whistleblowers, is that you can never really tell whose side they're on. They may come across as friendly and helpful, but their main goal may actually be to push you down a completely different avenue. Now, people have asked me, could that happen to you? And, I'm going to be honest and say, you can never say that isn't the case, but I think you have to become a good character, good view of people's characters, and to understand how, their way of talking, their way of, their sort of physical movements when they're talking to you. Are they looking you in the eye? Are they reading something to you or telling you something that was scripted? So you have to be a good study of, of somebody's character. And I think when you're dealing with whistleblowers, you can never really be fully sure whose side they're on, what their agenda is, or do they just really want to tell you what they know? So whistleblowers can be helpful, but you have to be extremely careful with them as well.
You do, and I think it is interesting to note, and we've been friends forever, and we share a lot of things, and it's you've seen, as I've dug deeper into my research with Skinwalker Ranch and MUFON and some of these things, how there have been people who've approached me and tried to get information, tried to give me information in the hopes that I would put it out, but didn't. Luckily, I was smart enough to go with my gut on that one, but that is a fascinating thing, and I have no doubt that Ray wasn't top on somebody's list to make sure he was stirred, pushed in a different direction, or who knows. It's just fascinating though, and it does happen. This is not a conspiracy theory.
Well, you're right, and but I mean, there's a lot more sort of threads to this, and one of the ones that might interest you revolves around a guy named Ralph Noyes, which is Noyes is Noyes, and Ralph Noyes was someone who, from the 1950s to the 1980s, Ralph Noyes was employed by the British Ministry of Defence, and in 1985, he wrote a novel called A Secret Property, and it was sort of a thinly veiled version of what actually happened at Rendlesham. And, for example, I mean, it's so close to the truth. For example, in the real story, we've got Colonel Holt. Well, the equivalent in A Secret Property is Colonel Hoyt. Colonel Holt's the real one, and Colonel Hoyt is the one in the novel. And so it's a very, very thinly veiled novel based on what happened in Rendlesham. Now, bear in mind that Ralph Noyes was, held a high position for many, many years in the British Ministry of Defence. So if anybody knew what was going on, he could have been one of the guys. Now, what's intriguing is the fact that in his novel, A Secret Property, Ralph Noyes presented the phenomenon in the woods as essentially a technology which could create visions before people's eyes. So, in many respects, that's extremely similar to the secret experiments, using holograms. And I think Ralph Noyes, my personal view is that he went as close as he could of telling the real story, but doing it in a fictional fashion. And I think there were two reasons for that. One was concerns about, breaking what's known in the UK as the Official Secrets Act, which covers people who work in governments and, what you can talk about and what you can't talk about. I think that was part of it. But the other part, is the money side of it, in the sense that, when he retired, he would be on a pension. And I'm sure he didn't want to lose that pension. So I think that's why he put his story out there, A Secret Property, which was very, very close to the reality of the situation. But he did so in a way that gave him a way out to say, well, it's just a novel, But Ralph Noyes is one of the far lesser known figures in the Rendlesham story, but arguably he's one of the most important ones as well.
And I'll have to do some digging into him. That he does sound incredibly important. And we're running out of time for the show. And I want to talk a little bit about microwave technology. I was reading today in the Space and Defense Journal of the United States Air Force Academy from the Eisenhower Center for Space and Defense Studies. And it says in here that microwaves can be used for inducing sensory hallucinations over a distance. For example, a voice of a good weapon that projects voices directly into the heads of individuals in support of psyops, yada, yada. There's all sorts of really interesting things that are taking place. That you've also got research that low-frequency waves or beams can affect brain cells, alter psychological states, and make it possible to transmit suggestions and commands directly into someone's thought processes. High doses of microwaves can damage that functioning. And so interesting reading. And so give us a little bit of information about that, because I know you mentioned you put that into your book.
Yeah, there's a section on that in relation to interestingly enough, another British Royal Air Force base called Greenham Common. Now, in the mid-1980s, there was a great deal of controversy surrounding the production of more and more nuclear weapons, which would be on UK soil. And in the mid-1980s, there was a group of women got together and basically kind of to find ways to bring it to the position of the general public, the media, and point out that the more and more of these nuclear weapons are going to be stationed in the UK. And the women, they, in terms of sort of agitating the government, they were sort of looking into ways to have the nuclear weapons removed, which of course would not happen. A group of demonstrators are not going to be able to turn over, the nuclear weapons storage. But they actually did achieve a great deal of media coverage, and if you Google Greenham Common women 1980s, you'll find the story of these sort of huge numbers of dedicated women that were sort of active outside of Royal Air Force Greenham Common. But what happened was that not too long into their demonstrations outside of the base, a lot of them started to have very, very strange illnesses and diseases and conditions. For example, anxiety, stress, memory loss, things like this started to affect many of them. And rumours started to circulate to the effect that they were being targeted by what are known as non-lethal weapons, using sort of low-frequency technologies, microwave technology, as a means to essentially place them in a position where, after a time, they would not be able to function properly. And that's exactly what happened. And those rumours about Greenham Common and how the women were affected significantly, both psychologically and physically. Blood pressure plummeted. A number of the women suddenly developed low blood pressure, splitting migraines, things like that. And when you read the stories about this, it seems to be the case that some sort of targeted non-lethal weaponry was used to try and force the women to leave. And so that again demonstrates a perfect example of how sophisticated technology has been used to affect the minds of people at military bases.
Right, absolutely. And they have to, have real world testing scenarios to test things on. And that's why the Skinwalker Ranch thing has been so intriguing to me, because here you have the perfect storm. You've got a place that, that obviously 22 million, Pentagon, some of that money is still missing by some of the latest reports, not accounted for. And then you've got a place where you're sending people that are in the military that have been in high stress situations, and they are out there and they are seeing things that now we wonder what sort of technology that was. And you've also got the fact, and I know that I've said this before in many shows, and I've told you, Nick, as well, but where Robert Bigelow specifically told the people high up at Bass that he did not want them on the property because they were coming down with people who were there were coming down with cancer. And he forbade the scientists to go there. So in my opinion, that would be because he actually understood that there was something there that they were testing that was responsible for some of these health effects. And it is interesting to see with the case, with Rendlesham, with Skinwalker, how people have stepped in to say, the UFOs, so it's da-da-da-da-da, because that creates so much confusion. And it's a really great cover story for many, many reasons.
Well, yeah, you're right. I mean, that gets to sort of the core of it when, you're using like a real phenomenon, but then using it as a cover for sophisticated military programs. And I mean, as you know, the the reason I got involved in the UFO subject was because my dad was a radar mechanic in the British Royal Air Force, and he was involved in several radar-based UFO encounters. And so there's no doubt in my mind that there's a real, genuine UFO phenomenon. Now, I don't know whether it's extraterrestrial, interdimensional, multidimensional, or something beyond our comprehension, but I do believe there is a genuine unknown UFO phenomenon. But what I think has happened over the years is that this genuine unknown UFO phenomenon has essentially been hijacked by agencies that use the UFO phenomenon as a cover for the development and deployment of new radical and advanced technologies, weaponry and things like that. And it's all hidden under the curtain of the UFO banner. But it gets confusing because, as I said, there is no doubt in my mind that there's a genuine phenomenon. So our goal, I think, more than anything else, in cases like this, is to figure out, which cases are the genuine UFO events and which ones are the created ones that are designed for very different reasons. And I think if we dig into that aspect more, then we're going to find more of the answers. It's not enough just to collect cool stories and repeat them over and over again. We have to go beyond that. What we have to do is to get to the heart of these cases, regardless of whether they go down the UFO path or they go down the secret experiment path. And in my view, Rendlesham began for many people as a definitive UFO event, a UFO landing. But I think now we really need to focus on looking at it from the perspective of a series of experiments designed to see how the human mind could be quite literally altered and amazed and changed, all as a result of technology rather than from alien events.
Right, and that is really important. And mimicry. I mean, that word should be. You're mimicking these paranormal events, and so there is all this confusion. And I think that was kind of the whole point of Bigelow and some of the things that they were studying, the mimicry. There's so much, but I think it's important for people to start looking at what has been put forward that is publicly available about technologies that are being deployed in theater now, and then ask yourself, which is all of these things that you could see at different paranormal locations or Skinwalker Ranch or Rendlesham, and then ask yourself, if that's the kind of technology that we know about publicly, how far advanced are we, from what we're being told in the public. And so I think that there's so many important questions, and I really appreciate the fact that you looked at this, you did research, and that you're showing this to the public. And at the end of the day, there is far more evidence for this in these specific cases than there is ET. And so people need to get a grip with regard to that. And like you said, and I've always said, there is something genuine going on. There's something that has interacted with us since the beginning of recorded history. We know that, but we also should, take note that this has been manipulated for decades. And that is important for our own empowerment. So I thank you for writing this book, and I definitely encourage people to buy it and then to weigh in. And if my listeners can go out and get the book, and we can have you on, again in another month and a half, and maybe get Ray Boucher on and talk about this, and then get the audience so they're interacting and asking questions about things. I think this would be really important.
Well, thanks. I mean, what I tried to do with the book was not sort of, force the scenario down people's throats or anything like that. What I've done is sort of carefully and precisely and bit by bit demonstrate why this part of the story can be applied to the secret experiment, and that part of the story can be applied to the secret experiments, and so on and so on. to show people bit by bit as to how you can dissect this as an experiment or a series of experiments rather than a UFO event. And, I would hope that people would sort of read the book from the perspective of, an open mind and seeing it for what it is. I didn't write the book to debunk it and to annoy everyone and piss them off. I wrote the book because I feel that people have for years been duped as to what actually happened, and it requires a situation where we rectify it, and I hope that's what I've done, is to rectify it as to what it really is.
Well, and that's exactly right. And then when you look at the people who are getting most upset about this, then perhaps you should shine a light on them and ask them, why are you so upset about something that can be backed up being put forward? Are you? Because I think there are people who've made money off of this over the years. I think that there's all sorts of things that go into effect with this. But I want to thank Nick Redfern for being here, the Rendlesham Forest UFO Conspiracy. Make sure you get that. Thank you, Nick. You guys all have a wonderful weekend. Stick around for Willie Miranda, and we will catch you next week. My guest is Mick West. Should be another good show. Take care.
Listen very carefully.
This is Houston. Say again, please.
Houston, we've had a problem.
This is UFO Classified, live every Friday night, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. The truth is out there, just waiting to be discovered.
And now, if you will, accompany me on a journey to the future.
For more information on the host of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes, upcoming guests, as well as links to the past shows,
visit her website at UFOclassified.com.
UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
This is KCOR Las Vegas, home of the Digital Radio Network, broadcasting from a